All right, we can probably, well, people are still joining, but we could probably get started because it looks like we have a fairly um, packed agenda today. Just as a reminder to everybody, this meeting is being recorded and will be uploaded to YouTube at some point afterwards. And your participation here is an agreement to abide by the OpenSSF code of conduct. Okay, cool. So, okay, one second here. So before, one second. People keep hopping on and hopping off. Just not sure if there's something wrong with the Zoom. Okay, so but before we get started, just wanted to kind of see if there's anybody who's new to the meeting, wanted to maybe introduce themselves.
Yes, sorry. I'll go ahead. I don't know if you were mentioning me as the person who kept joining and then leaving.
No, there was like 3 or 4 people who it just kept,
Yeah,
like Prakash and a few other folks
no,
that, okay.
I was having AV issues. Yeah, I guess I'm new, so I'll start. So hi, my name's Tom. I'm obviously new here. I am a solutions engineer working at JetStack. We specialize in Kubernetes mainly, and we provide consultancy services. We're based out of the UK. We provide consultancy services in Kubernetes and more recently, like wider like scope and in cloud native. And as of about October time, I've been sort of looking and exploring inside of the world of supply chain for our consulting customers, and I'm currently on the go in a consulting engagement with a customer, trying to bring solutions in the supply chain world. I also had a call on Friday with Path on the subject of using a new project called Tetragon. It's part of the Celium Foundation to generate machine attestations for builds taking place in Kubernetes pods. But yeah, that's me.
Cool. Thanks.
I'm new to this meeting at least. So Sebastian Awad from Anaconda, where I'm sort of responsible for supply chain security stuff. I previously worked on the update framework, a couple capacities, and Optane, which is the sort of automotive adaptation of that, and a few other similar projects. My interest here is around, so just for some background, Conda is a package manager basically in the Python ecosystem. It has relevance in R and some other stuff like that. People might know about it. There may be like 30 million people or something currently using it. So Anaconda builds a lot of open source software and makes that available on free repositories and then some, fancy plus repositories. And that build process is something that we're trying to scale out, and I'm trying to keep it safe as we do that. So that's my interest in this group.
Cool. Thanks. Oh, Prakash, were you saying anything or?
Hi, this is Prakash here, and I work for Google, and I'm primarily here as I work on supply chain software here and at Google, and mostly I'm working on Tecton chains and Tecton. So
Cool.
my primary interest is to understand how software supply chain works and how we can contribute more towards this.
Awesome. Cool. Glad to have everybody here. Oh yeah, also feel free if to put your everybody put your attendance in the community call notes, and we can get started here. So the first thing on the agenda is just I guess an explanation of the reorg, because we've been trying to pull the examples out of the actual main repo into their own repos. Does somebody, I'm not sure who put that there, wants to talk about that reorg?
Is that talking about a bunch of the stuff that I've been submitting last week? Probably.
I guess so.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was pulling a bunch of that stuff out. We had seen questions before, like when the Alpine image wasn't passing some of the gripe scans for different things. We were saying, hey, could we swap out the Alpine base image for something else? And it's like, well, we can't really, because all of our examples are pointing up to upstream repos that we don't own. And so figured, let's actually pull all these things into our own namespace, into our own organization. That way, if we need to make changes to some of these upstream projects, we can just modify our fork and we're not dependent on anything external to us. So bunch of changes, but all it was just forking everything and then just changing the pointer.
Cool. And then I think also one of the other things for having some of these things externally allows us to also begin to like create bad examples and make it very clear that those examples are bad and that they exist in their own sort of thing there. And then I think also it helps because it takes it removes the cadence of updating an example from a cadence of actually updating the code, the features and whatnot of Fresca itself. So because I know especially given some of the demos and some of the examples, if the examples require us to, like, if giving a demo requires us to sort of open up a PR that does a thing to sort of show like this is somebody attacking it or whatever, it looks bad to run that directly on the main repo or probably also inconvenient to everybody. Cool. Anybody have any sort of questions on that or question or concerns or any feedback? Okay. All right. So we can probably get to the next one, which I think is also you, Brendan, which is some of the architectural diagrams you've been working on.
Yeah, just had to take a second there, get the mic set and the sharing done. So I do have the PR sitting out there to do the documentation of what's happening there. It's a blog post sitting out there, basically. All of our documentation is kind of this blog post. And so it goes through, here's the diagram, here's the explanation of how all the pieces work together. And I think there's been some chatter about maybe want to move some lines around there, but otherwise, here's the rendered version if that's easier for people to look at. And so, yeah, any questions, comments, concerns, throw them at me. And I know Parth threw a couple of them out there, moving runtime observability somewhere in the cluster, which, pardon me, I'm doing the mental gymnastics of we want to make sure we still get some value out of that. And so if somebody is in the cluster compromising it and you use the runtime observability to detect that, then how do you guarantee the runtime observability didn't get compromised in the process? Yeah, got to sort that stuff out. And then I need to rework how the lines get drawn when we start doing Spire checks up to part 3, saying that it was going to go up to the pipeline runs.
Spire would go to the pipelines, or I'm sorry, so where is a pipeline controller? I guess that's not shown here. Yes.
The controller itself, I got the change controller. I don't have the individual Tecton controller. I just say their pipeline runs and task runs kicking off through here.
I see. Okay. Yeah, I was. That. Yeah, I think that's where it would go to. It would go to the actual pipeline controller.
Okay. We might do a little one-on-one pairing to sort out how the lines need to get drawn on this. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you want, you can just send over the diagram or put like a draw.io somewhere, and then you can.
I think in this, I've got the URL. I think if you do that URL, that'll open it up already rendered and everything for you, and you can tweak it from there.
Oh, perfect. Okay. Yeah. I mean, technically, it goes to the task run. Well, no, that's not true. It would have to go to the controller. Yeah. So, because the pipeline, it would connect to the pipeline controller connects to the Spire node, and that's the one that's instantiating the task runs and stuff like that. So that's gonna kick off everything. So
I've got it right now for the change controller. So we use another controller in there for doing the task run or the
Got it.
Tecton side of it.
Yeah, I
the
mean,
picture gets uglier.
you bring up an important piece, like how do we protect the runtime observability from attacks if you can't be inside the cluster, and they're usually deployed as a daemon set or something like that, right? So
it's a high level theoretical question.
Yeah.
So yeah. All right.
It's true.
I think that's what I've got for so far. Any other questions, comments, changes to make on this?
No, I don't think there's anything there. I think, I mean, the only thing is maybe highlight a little bit. I don't know if there's a way to do this more easily, but just to really highlight the idea there, right? That because I agree with you, Brendan, like the runtime visit, like for me, the runtime visibility from a application perspective is part of Fresca, but from an actual sort of like, does it live in the same cluster as the core components of Fresca? No, because you want to, still have that out external, but is it sort of part of what is still needed to do to do the thing? Yes.
Where is that security boundary is a hard thing to draw.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, it's and yes, as somebody who's been writing a lot of these sorts of diagrams lately, it is very it's pretty difficult.
From anybody that hadn't seen this diagram before, a quick run through of it is hopefully you start at the top, developer does their git commit, a trigger picks that up and sees, okay, there's a commit to a git repo. Let's kick off the pipeline run that's associated with. That triggers a bunch of task runs, one or more. Chains is watching that. All the output from this gets pushed up to a registry. Chains also pushes up its other details, signatures, attestations up to the registry. And that gets, deployed into production. And then down below, there's a bunch of the details with how Vault is integrated into this with Spire. And so Chains itself talks to the local Spire node, which is talking to a central Spire server to get a short-lived attestation that, hey, this is the Chains controller. It's got the right service count running the right namespace. We trust that it's really Chains talking there. So it gets that credential. That's what it uses to talk to Vault and to authenticate into Vault. Inside of Vault is where we're doing the actual image signing. And so the long-term key that's used to sign all the data here never leaves Vault itself. The sign key itself, the public key can get out because you want to be able to verify, but the actual sign key itself is kept secure. And so that's what we're trying to show here in the drawing. And also down below, I've kind of got a bunch of words to describe that as well. And hopefully all this just provisioned with Q on the Helm and stuff like that. And so I've tried to show that off to the side where hopefully we don't have developers just pushing arbitrary, run this task, run off this arbitrary image that is created and trust it's not going to do something bad in the Fresca environment. I think we're looking at having a lot more control over that by having something provision the infrastructure, and then developers don't actually submit their own task runs and pipeline runs. They're using stuff that has been provisioned for them.
Sorry, the runtime observability, is it, I guess that's like a generic term, but is the real meaning of that generic term that like the exact runtime observability tool to be used is still to be decided, or is by runtime observability, I'm guessing you mean like some sort of daemon set or something that has a deeper level of visibility over the cluster or whatever the environment is.
Something like a Falco, or I think Parth, looking at Tetragon or something like that. So we've got a couple tools out there that we've been looking at. How can you observe the syscalls, the network calls, whatever else is going on, eBPF, something like that, at a lower level to know that the thing we are running in this task run isn't doing something weird and unexpected that might indicate an attacker is actually in control.
Maybe I misheard, but like there is the intention isn't that runtime observability layer would run outside of the cluster, or is that the case?
The question is, how do you draw the security boundaries so that if someone is doing something malicious and attacking the environment, that they don't just have full access to modify the runtime observability to say everything's fine? And so how do you draw that security boundary in there so that we've got some trust that the runtime observability hadn't been compromised itself? Yeah,
I get that. Of course, like I don't think it's possible to run runtime observability outside of the cluster. Maybe I'm wrong, but obviously in the nature of sort of the level of access that it'll need, it's pretty impossible to do that. But yeah, I guess like at the moment, my like sort of point in my like line in the sand is like, provided that it has very restricted RBAC and it's running the kube system namespace. If you've looked at the Tetragon docs, they don't really allude to like that subject of where should you run it and how should you secure it, because obviously that's like I guess it's like a really high privilege access gate that could be used badly. But yeah, I don't know, it's a tough question.
Yeah, it's kind of the question is like, who watches the watcher, right? It's basically the so, and then who watches that watcher, right? Kind of like just keep going down. But
I do think that there's probably and once again, this is maybe some longer term sorts of things, but like, for example, the same way the Spire server lives outside of the cluster, could you have essentially the thing that's managing the runtime visibility live outside the cluster? The actual runtime visibility components could potentially run inside the cluster, but then preferably using stuff like Spiffy Spire, you'd be able to go and detect like, hey, somebody's messing with your runtime visibility as it's running. Once again, I don't know of anybody who's really looking at that level yet, but I do think that there's probably ways we can kind of do that. Because like the other thing that some folks do, right, is they don't run the runtime visibility directly in like the data plane, right, of the of Kubernetes. They run it on the host for the nodes, and then just have it like, oh, a pod spins up. You get that, you get to you can start looking at what's going on in there. But I know that Tetragon has that extra layer that makes it nice from a usability perspective, because you could just have a custom resource that goes out and essentially is your policy or your configuration for what should be investigated. And that makes it then it makes it very easy to just be like, okay, cool. Now I don't have to like spend a whole bunch of effort figuring out how to orchestrate all this. The custom resource and the controllers and whatever are going to do it all for me. But I think there's an interesting problem, right? Because like the thing that Spiffy and Spire do, and Brendan and Parth, correct me if I'm off base here, right, is even if you were an admin in the Kubernetes cluster, if I start messing with stuff, trying to get it not to look at the Spire node or whatever, we'll be able to detect that, because we'll say, wait a second, things are not getting the identities they're supposed to or whatever. And that's because the actual sort of central Spire management server is outside the cluster, so that it's in a separate security boundary.
It depends on how you configure Spiffy and Spire, or Spire specifically, to do that authentication of the environment. If it's just saying make sure that this cluster is running within your cloud environment, so it's in the cloud API, the cloud API is just going to say, hey, that's a VM we provisioned. They don't care what's running in the VM. Similarly, we're looking at what's running in the Kubernetes cluster, and if your selector is saying just make sure it's in the right namespace with the right service account, if an attacker gets into that namespace, uses that service account, they're getting the same recognition that anybody else would get. So it just depends on what you're using for those selectors inside of Spire to whether you can detect this stuff.
Yeah, I think it'd be a lot harder. Unless they're changing something specifically, like the selectors that it picks it up on. But
yeah, some of it, and I know they've been looking in the Spire ecosystem of how they can use like TPMs and do a little bit more deeper node verification. It's just how much effort do you want to put into it versus the reward, and knowing how much maintenance you're going to have to do to keep track of, okay, every time you push a change to any piece of the OS, all of a sudden all those digest and everything, all those hashes coming out of the TPM are going to say, hey, everything changed. And it's like, well, yeah, we upgrade the server. We do that every week, do that every other day.
Yeah. Well, what we were thinking is kind of like expanding out what we did with pipelines, basically, how the task run is signed, right? And thinking like in terms of a Kubernetes standpoint, and I think like this is like optimistic, but basically having that in terms of Kubernetes, like only the Kubernetes controller or whoever else is able to, it does validation on the actual controller to make sure that it's not being modified by something else outside the Kubernetes control, I guess, right? The controller or something, and doing some kind of signing and verification that way. So if something is changing, right, we know that it's changing and we can invalidate that. That's what we were thinking in terms of how we could use Spire as a whole and secure all of the Kubernetes controllers and whatever else is running and custom CRDs and stuff. But that's being very that would take some work, but yeah.
And it also gets you down to the Kubernetes level. And if somebody gets down below the Kubernetes infrastructure and gets into the host OS itself, Kubernetes might not see that.
Right.
None of this is easy.
Yeah. But I mean, luckily from our standpoint, just to kind of tie it back, is I do think that like, given what we're already doing is far beyond what the majority of folks are looking at in this space. I think we have a lot. I think the learnings that we're getting from here are also helping provide feedback to other to other projects on, hey, we have a use case around this thing. How would we do it? And then it's at least helping out, I think.
I think as well, like, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but if someone does break onto the Kubernetes node or the control plane nodes or whatever, that is somewhat game over anyway. I'm not saying like, of course, if you are able to get sort of spiffy IDs to relate to TPM modules, so yeah, so you can have maybe more sort of restriction on the host then, but like there's already a mound of different things you can do if you can get full access onto even one of the worker nodes in itself. So for me, that doesn't invalidate the strength in hardening the Kubernetes layer and inside of the Kubernetes realm. I don't think I've seen a lot of stuff and be like, oh, well, it's just pointless because if it can break onto the node and do this, then all of this is pointless. And it's like, well, like, of course, but that with an abstraction, that's always to a degree going to be the case. I don't know.
Yep, definitely.
Cool. Ready for the next topic?
Yeah. All right. So the next one's going to be pretty quick. It's mostly going to be me saying I'm trying to figure out exactly what we need to, like there's a baseline set of standards for the OpenSSF and just most of the Linux Foundation on stuff like adopting the community guidelines. So there was there were questions about how does someone new become a maintainer, right? So right now, the way that it's working is myself and Brad are both the leads on the project, and then other folks can join as maintainers. And then beyond that, there's really not a lot of clarification on, at least right now, and we need to get some of this clarification from the OpenSSF, because at least when we started Fresca and we brought it over to the OpenSSF, the OpenSSF was still developing their governance model, and that's still sort of going through. But I think they adopted the majority of it, and so now there's some rules around, and we just need to do a little bit of research on it around, if somebody contributes enough and gives a thumbs up or whatever, does that mean they're now a maintainer or whatever? Like, contributors are largely just anybody who joins these meetings, anybody who opens up a PR, they're a contributor, and anybody's allowed to be a contributor as long as they abide by the code of conduct. But maintainers obviously have a little bit more access, usually are able to review PRs and get those merged in, and so on. And another reason why we also want to really make sure we are abiding by these sorts of governance rules, is given that this tool, right, is its intention is to be a secure build tool. Well, you can't really have a secure build tool if anybody is allowed to just like merge anything that they want. So our Git Git repo does have a bunch of policies in place to make sure that even Brad and myself can't just automatically merge stuff. But there still are issues in the GitHub space around some of this that, you know, at the same time, Brad or I could change the rule that says that we need that we can't just merge it ourselves. And changing that rule itself is unless you're paying for GitHub Enterprise or GitHub, like whatever their the cloud stuff, unless you're paying a lot of money to GitHub, they don't allow for, I think, the insight piece. So it's hard to kind of determine like, oh, like from the logs, who made that change to turn off 2-person code review, and that sort of thing. So I think that's kind of where we're going to be. Just need to do some research. I just found out today that the person I've been reaching out to from the OpenSSF is actually on maternity leave. So I was like, oh, that's why she hasn't been responding to my emails. But yeah, so I'm good. I found out that the other person who I should be talking to. So I'll keep everybody updated here. Yeah. So Brad, was there anything in specific regarding it?
I think we did have a specific person we were thinking about throwing in as new maintainer. So I was wondering if we wanted to put in, and I know I'm stepping all over, I'm asking you, Brad, but maybe nominate someone right now and just go through a process, get a bunch of us to all give a thumbs up and say, sure, okay, you know, we as a group have all approved that.
Sure.
Brad, are you thinking along the same lines there?
I'm not sure. I mean, I had somebody approach me about becoming a maintainer. I'm not sure if we're talking about the same person or not.
We will find out the hard way.
Well, I mean, once you find out whether or not that person is looking to become an actual maintainer, and we can, you know, I feel like anybody can nominate a maintainer, and then I think we just need to go through some
background check.
No.
Well, so the only reason I paused is because this person is another city employee. So I didn't know if we wanted to.
I think for now it's probably fine, but I think what we probably want to do as a group is start to nominate and try and get more folks outside of city, from there, because right now it's mostly either the majority of folks who are contributing right now are either at city, contracted at city, or previously at city. And so we do want to make sure that this group does become a bit more members of multiple communities.
Diverse.
Yeah.
So I guess my question is, what do we want to do in the interim before we have a process? So I'm sort of on the fence because this person at city has contributed some, but it's only been a short period of time. So like within the last month and a half or two. So
I think I know who you're talking about just because of looking at the PRs. Yeah. Once again, like I think we're always looking for more folks to kind of come in, step up, and join. But I do think there's two separate problems, right? One is we don't want it just to be purely, folks from city, because it's going to just give folks the wrong idea. At the same time, the more the merrier. And I think, we do want to start having more and more folks contribute, whether it's folks, for example, who from, JP Morgan or Anaconda, Google, JetStack, et cetera, who might also want to contribute a bit more. And I know that's actually another thing that I don't have it on the agenda for this meeting, but I was starting to draft up something on what can we do from the perspective of the community to start to see, hey, there's a lot of folks who are joining the meetings, just getting interested and yada yada, but are there folks who are interested in contributing, or if folks are using Fresca or testing Fresca out, can we get some feedback back on it, and what would it take to kind of, just so that we start building up a groundswell there.
So
cool.
Michael, if I may, just to kind of like pitch in into what you just said, right? So I'm definitely kind of like interested, right? But being someone new to the project, I think that the agenda today is quite important to get a grasp of how are things working behind the curtains, because it also kind of speaks to what kind of responsibility you're expecting as a maintainer, given that it's not formally placed in the project, right? And even out of the regular meetings, I don't know, exceptional session where you can actually explain that would be beneficial, right?
Sure.
But yeah, I do agree that having a more diverse group in terms of where do these people work and what do they bring to the table will benefit long term.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really important there. And I think one of the other things that I think we were looking to maybe do, right, was also to maybe have them to maybe release like record a couple of YouTube videos or something like that of demos of the project, because the project is not like, it's hard to, I think, explain as like a 2-sentence pitch, right? If I look at, for example, a lot of SigStore and Cosign, you can very clearly see like, oh, Cosign's a tool that signs stuff. Great. Fresca is a tool that does CI build. Oh, but how is it different than Jenkins or whatever? It's like, well, we're doing a lot of the security stuff. And you start to go and say, okay, well, what makes it secure? And you go, okay, well, it's the spiffy spire, and yeah, it's not the easiest thing to just kind of get started with. And I think that, I think you bring up a good point there. I've been trying to think about maybe writing up a combination of blog articles and whatever, of just like getting started so folks understand, one is how to run it, and two is what is the benefit that they're getting out of this, based, as opposed to just, let's say, hey, this thing uses Tecton. How is it different than normal Tecton? And Tecton itself is fine, but it's just like, oh, but Tecton doesn't have a lot of those secure defaults. And so Fresca is sort of like running Tecton and yada yada with a lot of those secure defaults. And yeah, Sebastian, it probably also makes some sense there, is to add a threat model. So
Sebastian kind of stole away a little bit what I wanted to comment on, right? Because the threat model is an important part, right? But looking at the pull request, the 267, right? The diagram. Now, I mean, obviously, this is not criticism. This is just kind of like my opinion in terms of like something that I've been seeing is a trend to use a C4 model, right? And I don't know if that would be a way to make this a little bit more digestible for people.
Yeah, I think we could probably do that. So the application, so we could probably separate out the like Brendan's thing, I think, is more of the actual logical. Is that the right term? Like it's like the actual, like almost like the components and how they actually exist within a network. Whereas I know we actually do have the C4 diagrams under docs diagrams. And the problem there, well, one is I forgot to render it correctly. And so now I think it got a little messed up. So I'll have to fix it. But we are using some of that there. And the C4 models are really good for thinking about them at that like higher level, like conceptual sort of thing of like the purposes of these things are to do, let me see if I have one up. No, yeah, so Yeah, I have something here. So just to share this real quick. So yeah, this is like for example, some of the stuff that we've been doing with like a C4, diagram, right? And once again, this is not purely for Fresca, but it's just, the general sort of thing where actually this is supposed to be a person. But there's the different things. And then the idea would be, hey, you look at the secure software factory or whatever, you click in this case, it's Fresca. And so you'd be able to see all the different elements there. So actually the ones that are useful are the ones we have in the secure software factory white paper. And a lot of our diagrams, because I also made the diagrams in that paper, are based on C4. So let me just kind of go over here, share. 1 second. And like these diagrams are inside of at least the as code, like the structurizer as code diagrams are in the GitHub, but something got messed up with the rendering. So I'll have to re-upload those when I get a bit of a chance. But the basic idea, right, would be, so this is sort of the C4 diagram of explanation of what Brendan had up, and some of it's a little bit older, so it doesn't have everything. And some of this is kind of like, this sort of just talks about like the spiffy Spire stuff without really talking about how it's actually set up. So I think both of those things are probably still really valuable. One is sort of like for folks who are understanding, hey, how is this actually set up at the network level? And then some folks are like, how are these things actually intended to work together? I think is also valuable there. Cool. Yeah. So actually that makes a lot of sense. Do you want to open up a GitHub issue just asking for like, hey, can you add the updated? Awesome.
No worries.
Yeah, that's a really good, this is really good feedback. And I'm sure I'll probably be reaching out to a few of you just to double check, like, what can we do to make this more interesting for folks and more easier for folks to contribute to or use or whatever, as we are continuing to build this out. Okay. So next up, we have updates on ongoing work. Parth, do you want to talk about runtime visibility?
Yeah, sure. So like Tom mentioned, I met with him on Friday last week, basically, and I think he has a working demo that I think he eventually will show us. But basically, the idea was that, actually, we were both kind of like wandering around in Tetragon Slack, and that's how we kind of met up. We were both kind of figuring out the same thing, trying to address the same problem space. So it'll be great, I think, eventually when Tom's ready to show the demo that he has. I think it was very nice, and it did a lot of the things that Fresca would need, and I think it'd be great to collaborate more with it. Basically, the thought process was kind of like what Brandon was saying, is that we kind of want more runtime visibility in the actual task runs. So what I was thinking was is that maybe Prakash, you can chime in. I know you're working with Tetragon, Tecton and Tecton chains. Is like we were thinking about making it part of chains, right? If we make it part of chains, then it has the ability to, filter. So Tetragon right now does not, I'm using a gRPC to connect to it, and it does not have the ability, it looks like, to filter yet. Maybe that needs to be fixed, or maybe that was the intent, but basically it just spits out a stream of logs and you have to do your own filtering, right? So that's okay, right? You can filter on a specific task, because the thought process is that chains would know, once a task run has been instantiated by pipelines, chains can go in and monitor that, right? So once it kicks up, we can go start the process of filtering the logs in Tetragon and collect all the ones that are relevant for that specific task run, and then parse it out and maybe create some kind of a attestation, in Toto attestation that we can, again, Chains has the ability to do signing, all that kind of stuff. We can take all the work that Brandon's already done on that space, right? And using Vault and all that kind of stuff for do the signing and pushing it into whichever location we wanted to do. So it seems like it's a good location for it. But I would like to, if you have any kind of feedback on that, what do you think?
So the question is it that Change should handle the logs filtering as well and store the logs as provenance in attestations, so that can be used while you're deploying the model or the artifact.
Right. Yeah. So store the logs, process them, change them into the attestation formats, right? Create them into the Toto attestation, whatever it needs to be, and then it already does the uploading and signing and stuff like that, right? So it's already creating attestations for the build, like for the build artifacts, right? How the pipeline is going through and building the things, right? It's getting all that build configuration. So do the same thing and do it for runtime at the same time, basically.
Yeah. So doing for the runtime. So there is one more project that we have, in which we are trying to build attestations for the entire task. So some of the build rules are not being captured into attestations as of now. Like for example, what sidecars were used during the build, and so many other things. Because these sidecars are quite useful when we deploy them. We don't want to deploy sidecars maybe which are built with certain kinds of sidecars. So we don't want to deploy artifacts which are built with certain kinds of sidecars. Is that the use case that you are talking, or is it for a different kind?
We are thinking, yeah. So this is more in terms of like what is happening during the actual build, like what is happening in the task run in terms of the syscalls and the processes that are getting called, right?
Okay.
So more visibility at that lower level. So not
Yeah.
specific for like sidecars and stuff like that, but yeah.
Yeah, that could be useful. That would be quite useful. But if we can make up a case of how we will use this as well, right? I mean, if you're going to use a lot of logs, if you're going to add a lot of the logs into the provenance, then the provenance is also going to increase in size, which is not a big deal. But we still need to make some calls about what all we are going to add, so that if it will be really useful later when we are going to deploy it. Certain things are quite useful, I think. I think some of the logs will be very useful. Yeah, if you could do a case-by-case analysis on what to.
Sorry, my thinking, and maybe I'm wrong here, but like, and I guess maybe it's worthwhile for me to mention, like in what I've been working on and how it sort of slightly differs to what Path's sort of look in on things has been. I've been like chewing over the idea of being able to do this since like about September time. I just didn't quite know how to do it until Tetracon came along, but I've been looking at it from far more of a generic perspective. I see value in the idea of I can generate an attestation. It doesn't have to be for a build that's taking place. It could just be for a pod that's running. And for some reason, I want like a short snippet auditory sort of snapshot of what happened inside of that. So I was looking from a more generic perspective, but like I see what you mean about the size. And in fact, when I was like doing my tests, I just like looked at different ways that I could present the data in an attestation and things like that. And I very quickly realized if I do some things, you're just going to have this enormous like long file, which of course would be hard to use at admission time. My thoughts were there may be benefit in having them to be completely separate attestations between the Sales of Provenance attestation and the runtime of observability attestation, so that it's not necessarily that the Sales of Provenance is going to get longer. There'd be two separate attestations that would be like fetchable and used at different points, and that would help with any like latency or consumption issues. But maybe there's a drawback to that. I don't know.
Right. Yeah. The thought process was definitely that it would be two different attestations. Right. It'd be separate from the self attestation. It'd be a separate thing entirely. That would get uploaded. Yeah.
I think having a separate attestation is surely useful. I think that might be something which we can pursue, and because yeah, we don't want to increase the salsa attestation. Mostly make it as a machine readable, so that
Yeah.
it has can be used or deployed, and keep
Yeah.
anything else in another place.
Yeah, I think I think how the data is presented, I think that's the most important piece, right? So you have all this information. Like, what information do you want to collect or keep for the long run, right? What is more important? And obviously, you don't want everything because it's going to fill up the size of the attestation is going to be massive. So maybe we filter on, okay, we'd only take specific important pieces of it. And
yeah, this is interestingly, given like the amount of sort of strength that a tool like Tetracon can give you, like it's obviously I've been talking to the maintainers, and like there's a lot, as I'm not a unfortunately for you guys to hear, I'm not a syscall expert, so like my understanding of Linux kernel level functions isn't great, but you can really expand like the policies that you set inside of Tetragon, so you can get observability on loads of different syscalls and functions. But I guess it was the intention of when I was working on it, but in the use case you guys are looking for with Tecton, would you want it to be like a user configurable predicate, or like a user configurable attestation based off of the things that they decide that they are interested in? Of course, they're saying defaults and things like that, and I get the drawbacks of saying, okay, you can do whatever you want, but it's like being able to sort of utilize and leverage the power of those policies to then reflect that in attestation gives you a lot of flexibility as to what specific things you'll care about to check about while that image was being built up, but maybe a standard is better. I'm not necessarily for one or the other.
I think in terms of Fresca, I think we were thinking about it being a little bit more rigid in terms of like secure defaults, exactly what we're collecting. Because I don't think we want to give that control over, right? Because that leads to, hey, maybe the developer or whoever the sysadmin is changing stuff for their own benefit, and you're missing information that you do want to collect, right? So maybe in that case, you're not making it, you're not giving them it would be more of a built-in, like, hey, based on you're using Q, all that kind of stuff, right? We decide, hey, this is the tracing policies that we want to go forward with, and that's what gets applied automatically when Fresca gets instantiated. I think in a more generalized use case, I think that makes more sense. Obviously, you want to give the user a lot more control exactly what they want to collect. But I think in terms of Fresca, I think it has to be a little bit more controlled.
Okay.
Yeah.
So from what I understand,
go ahead.
So from what I understand, we have a salsa attestation, which is going to be something which is going to be read by everybody, which is going to be a standard. And then users can have a whole lot of other kind of attestations which they want to capture, which might not be defined in the spec or the salsa spec, which might be useful for certain users. And that can be user defined and can be user implemented and for specific use cases, which is a good idea, I would think. And we can keep them separate so that.
Right. Yeah, definitely. It's going to be separate. And I think the thought process is like, if you want to collect it, like you said, if it's useful, then, you can make it an option. It's obviously it's going to be an option in Chains. So you can enable it based on a config map, right? And like, depending on, like if it's Fresca, then maybe we do want it enabled because that's what we're kind of, it's giving us more visibility, more security. But in terms of general Chains use case, right, if you don't need to use it, then you don't have to use it, kind of thing. That's what we're thinking. And then keeping it separate, and then, right, keeping the salsa attestation versus like runtime attestations, of course, will be all separate. But I think it's just figuring out exactly what does the attestation look like, right? What do we want to capture in that? And what's relevant and what's not relevant in the long term. Like if you're going to be holding on to these logs, right, it has to have some benefit in the long term. And if you're not having any kind of benefit in terms of maybe for capturing stuff that's not useful, then there's no point in capturing it, right? So.
Yeah, I think that's there's some interesting things there. I agree with you, Parth. I think a lot of it is there's the provenance piece, which is one piece, but then there's also like something like there's some other set of attestations that most likely going to be lots of attestations that at some point we're going to want to have Chains have at least some knowledge of, right? And or you know, or if it makes sense, right? Because the thing that we like about chains is because chains is external to the actual pods running the thing, we have less of you know, just as an example, right? If a build generates or if some task in Tecton generates an SBOM, we might want that SBOM to be signed and attested to or whatever. And you know, allowing the pod to do that directly, well, if for some reason that has gone through some sort of attack, it can sort of lie or whatever. Chains, you know, having chains sort of do that signing and attesting fixes some of those things. But I think there's a bunch of other stuff that we'll need to kind of do, because I know with stuff like resources having been deprecated and whatnot, like we need to figure out ways to say like, hey, this pod outputs a SBOM, use the SBOM attesting or whatever, right? Like there needs to be somewhere there. But yeah, this is really good, and I think we should have another chat about it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think it'd be great to get Tom and Prakash, like, and maybe on another call we can maybe sync up and talk more exactly how we want to approach this. There's another person who's on the call, Shripad also, who's now part of Intel. He's also working in this space, so we can probably collaborate and figure out a way forward. I think you're on mute, Prakash, if you were saying something.
I'm just saying, yeah, that's a good idea. We can get to both times.
Cool. So we have 5 minutes left. Quickly for the other two agenda items, or actually one is so we can probably talk about Dagger IO integration later, but it's something that I think we want to potentially explore, given that Dagger, now that it's officially open source, I know it originally was sort of open source, but only by invitation. But they're doing a lot of interesting stuff with the Q stuff, and they're doing some interesting stuff with getting, you know, writing a pipeline once and it could run on Jenkins, it could run all these other things. So it helps people transition between different tools. And I think we want to explore, like, does it make sense there? Because as a reminder, we're doing a lot of stuff using Q, the language that was sort of somewhat based on Google's internal configuration language. But that language is trying to abstract some of the stuff around, you know, around pipeline. Sorry, they're doing Dagger is using Q to abstract stuff around pipeline, so you could run the same pipeline whether it's on Jenkins or Tecton or whatever. At least that's the ideal there. And so, hey, if Fresca is trying to be the secure build, if folks start using Dagger, oh, great, we want to move from Jenkins to, let's say, something like Fresca as a secure build. That might be a bit easier. Or because remember, like the other. Oh, go ahead.
There's a bit of an issue there because they're actually using BuildKit as the actual execution engine for the build. So it's not like you're actually taking your build description, transforming it into something that's Jenkins specific. It's actually, you're just running the BuildKit inside of Jenkins or inside of whatever your build system is. So you're sort of hooking yourself in there. But I think there's still some value in the data model that they've used to represent the kinds of things that you want to do in the builds. And I think we could still leverage some of that, but I'm not sure that we want to transform what we have into running, under BuildKit, right? Instead of taking advantage of the native Tecton stuff. So.
Oh, interesting. So it's not actually doing the actual work within, because it's still using BuildKit.
No, on top of it's still it's still doing all the work in BuildKit.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, that's interesting, and it's something. So, just as a reminder for the other folks, just one of the things that we're trying to do with Fresca is also trying to make stuff like the fact that we use Tecton behind the scenes and Tecton chains behind the scenes and Spire and all this sort of stuff. We want to use Q to help us abstract some of that so that when we go and deploy a new pipeline, instead of having to say, well, I need to deploy this config map and that thing and whatever, we could have Q, and the end user maybe just fills out some stuff like, I'm a Java application or I'm a Go application. This is my GitHub, and or this is my Git and whatever. And then everything else, like the policies and everything else, get generated. So anyway, that's some stuff to kind of consider there. I want to quickly move to the other very short topics, which so one is Friday, the first Salsa tooling working group discussion is happening. I'm co-leading that there. So that's going to be discussion about, hey, like for folks who are interested in Salsa, what can we do there? I'm going to be talking a little bit about Fresca and how Fresca does a lot of the Salsa stuff, but there's a bunch of tools that people are using to sort of generate Salsa provenance, validate Salsa provenance, ingest Salsa provenance, query it, so on. So there's going to be some interesting stuff there. That's on Friday. That's actually the, I'll put this in the notes here. It's the Salsa tooling Slack channel. There'll be invites going out, but with some folks out of the office and whatever, getting the actual calendar meeting updated has been a little difficult. So that's that. Another thing is CD Foundation is starting to build some stuff on their own around sort of a secure build infrastructure and that sort of thing. They're looking to also, they want a lot more folks to maybe help go over there. So we're looking at maybe talking to some of them about some of these things and seeing if there's ways we can integrate and collaborate and so on. Cool. Any questions? Yep. Cool. Well, have a good rest of your week, everybody. Hope to see some of you at the Salsa tooling meeting. Bye.
Cheers.